All right, everybody, here we are once again. It is me, Catherine, and I'm here with my friend Savannah.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome back, and this is Creepy Americana, in case that was somehow not obvious.
Are we doing introductions now? Is that going to be a thing?
I don't know, everybody else does it. And also people do corrections corners, and this isn't exactly a correction, but it is something that I recently re-edited an episode.
Which one?
The Death Cube.
Oh, I loved the Death Cube.
You know what? It was a really good episode, so I was really glad that I did that, right?
Right.
There was a part in that episode where I briefly mentioned what I figured was an urban legend about a girl who died in a cemetery.
I don't remember that at all.
I was like, she got stuck on something and then died of fright.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought that was an urban legend, too. It sounds really similar to the dorm-type stories, like the Skyline.
Which is exactly what you said. So, good memory. Because that was...
2 years ago?
I thought it was last August. Maybe it was 2 years ago. Honestly, no, wait. Maybe it was 2 years ago. I really don't know. I don't know anything.
How long have you been doing the show?
You know what?
We have always lived in the castle.
Something like that. I think maybe 2015 is when I started, so this is like the third year, but it's only been last year that I really started putting out content regularly. So anyway, I got a gift card for Books A Million. I'm totally plugging Books A Million here. For Christmas. And one of the books that I picked up with the gift card was a book that I had gotten somebody else as a gift. And I was like, damn, I want that for myself. Because that's the kind of person I am sometimes.
That's relatable.
Right? Anyway, so the book that I got is Scary Stories Treasury, which is a collection of the 3 books, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones. And so I just started reading through it, and I got through, a few pages, because it's pretty short and not a particularly long read, so... Anyway, what should I happen to stumble upon?
The story.
The story that's called The Girl Who Stood on a Grave. So the thing is that, yes, these are stories that are collected from folklore and urban legends and things like that, so I assume that I was right in saying that it was an urban legend, but I have to believe that I remembered it from this book.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Because that makes the most sense, but it's really short, so I wanted to just kind of read it. Okay, so The Girl Who Stood on a Grave. Some boys and girls were at a party one night. There was a graveyard down the street, and they were talking about how scary it was. "Don't ever stand on a grave after dark," one of the boys said. "The person inside will grab you. He'll pull you under." "That's not true," one of the girls said. "It's just a superstition." "I'll give you $1 if you stand on a grave," said the boy. "A grave doesn't scare me," said the girl. "I'll do it right now." The boy handed her his knife. "Stick this knife in one of the graves," he said. "Then we'll know you were there."
Oh my god, I remember this one!
Yeah. The graveyard was filled with shadows and was quiet as death. "There's nothing to be scared of," the girl told herself, but she was scared anyway. She picked out a grave and stood on it. Then quickly she bent over and plunged the knife into the soil and started to leave. But she couldn't get away. Something was holding her back. She tried a second time to leave, but she couldn't move. She was filled with terror. "Something has got me," she screamed, and she fell to the ground. When she didn't come back, the others went to look for her. They found her body sprawled across the grave. Without realizing it, she had plunged the knife through her skirt and had pinned it to the ground. It was only the knife that held her. She had died of fright.
Oh yeah, I definitely remember that story. I actually think I read a different variation of the same story in a different book.
That's totally possible, considering it is...
a collected story.
Yeah, folklore, so it makes sense.
Man, I goddamn love urban legends. I love how they often have this, especially the ones that we were telling when we were kids, often have this non-magical tint to them, where, like, we all know that we're all a little bit afraid of ghosts, but none of us really believe in ghosts. And so they'll, like, drop the idea of there being a ghost in front of you at the beginning, and then they'll come back around with it just being mundane at the end.
Yeah, and that's... I think we've talked about this before. It was the most recent episode that I put out at the beginning of January, and it was basically just talking about how I love stories where it seems to, like, set up, where it's something supernatural, supernatural. It's like this magical thinking kind of situation.
And then it undercuts.
It undercuts and just turns out to be something kind of normal. And I don't know, I think that's particularly effective in horror just because of it sort of represents a collective fear.
Yeah, like we all know that we're hearing something in the dark, and our first thought is, it's a monster. And our second thought is, it is a man who is trying to kill me. And both of those things are afraid. And so when you can actually experience the jump from monster to serial killer in the process of fiction, kind of takes you back through that internal process that you experience when you hear a bump in the night.
Because what would you rather it be?
Personally, you know what? I'm much more afraid of monsters than I am of serial killers.
I am so goddamn terrified of a dude coming into my house and killing me. I'm like...
I've never been afraid of that.
That's because you've never watched any crime shows or movies or anything like that.
Yes, that is true.
Yes. I'm like headlong into that. So it's definitely something that feels a lot more real to me.
Yeah, but I could definitely see myself being the girl who stabs a knife into her own skirt and...
You would.
That's a relatable story for me. I am my own undoing.
Yeah.
I think that's why it works so well, because we're all seeing ourselves in that character. But we read a book of scary stories to get scared, so that we couldn't sleep, and we did it on purpose. Like,
I do it on purpose all the time. I'm still trying to not sleep for some reason. You know, it's gotten to the point, though, where I will have dreams, I guess you would call them nightmares, where it's sort of a state of, like, half being awake and half not being awake. So you're experiencing sort of this vision and, like, sensory experience of something bad happening to you.
Okay.
But you're actually awake.
Oh, that sounds awful.
Yeah, it happened to me maybe a month or so ago. I woke up at 3 a.m. because I checked the clock, and I was just having this, like, halfway nightmare vision thing of, like, this guy who came into the room and was on top of me and, like, strangling me. And, you might think that after experiencing that, you would have a hard time going back to sleep.
You went right back to sleep.
Not my ass. I was knocked out. I just wanted to briefly talk about the hell houses.
Oh yeah, tell me about hell houses. I don't know what that is. Maybe it'll come back to me.
I think it will, because it's a religious thing, and it's probably something that's unique to the Southeast. So basically, a hell house is like a haunted house, but it's meant to show you what kind of tortures and awful things would happen to you if you go to hell.
Oh, okay, so it's like a reenacted kind of thing?
Yeah, but there's like people suffering and blood and like all that stuff. It's set up like where you walk through it. Yeah, a little bit, yeah, where you're walking through it and you're getting different tortures and people screaming and blood and blah, blah.
Sounds like a fun thing to be an actor in. It's not supposed to delight and entertain, it is supposed to scare you straight.
Yes, exactly. So I like it on principle of just like the concept, although I don't particularly care for the religious part of it, but I like it on concept. What if there was just a secular hell house?
That's called a haunted house, my guy.
No, but...
Okay, so basically, what if there was a live reenactment of the Dante's Inferno type experience of being able to... Yeah, sure, man. Why don't we already have one of those?
I agree. You know what we do have, though? Real haunted houses.
Do you think so? There's some debate about that.
Well, I'm very, very disinclined.
So you don't believe in poltergeist activity?
It's not that I don't believe in poltergeist activity. It's that a lot of it seems to be perpetuated for...
profit?
Notoriety? Yeah.
Notoriety.
Not even necessarily profit, because there's definitely some people who have not profited from it, but, clearly things like the Amityville Horror House are just there for profit and capitalizing off a real family's tragedy. But there are some cases that are older and somewhat well documented, and it seems like there wasn't really anything to be gained, like the Bell Witch. Do you know about that?
I know the name, but I really don't know the details.
Okay, well, it took place in the 1800s in Tennessee, and the name comes from the family. Bell was the last name, and they had a very large property that had a cave on the property.
Okay.
So there's the Bell Cave, and it's just kind of a whole situation where the ghost was like specifically after the father and telling him, you know, that she was going to kill him and all this sort of stuff. And basically he wound up dying and like suffering, and he was completely tortured by this ghost. So
And you wouldn't just say that was schizophrenia or something?
I would if he had been the only person who had seen it.
There you go then.
And it doesn't seem to be the case, because if I recall correctly, and don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that church people were involved at some point.
There is something that you noted, I saw your notes, that information kills ghosts.
Haha, yes. So that actually is a quote from a guy named Eric Meharry in the book Ghostland by Colin Dickey, which is a book that I have enjoyed so much, and I've taken so many notes from it. I absolutely love it. And at a certain point in the book, he was talking about this ghost story that I think took place in Oregon or Washington. I'm not really sure. I remember it's one of those hippie cities up there in the Pacific Northwest. And he was talking about how there was this bridge, and underneath of it, there was kind of just this wild area that's dark and untamed. And there was this particular girl who was haunting the area because she was murdered under the bridge. Well, this guy, Eric Meharry, is actually, I guess, what you would call like a local historian of sorts who was very interested in this case. And it turns out that the girl wasn't murdered in the park at all. She was murdered 7 or 9 blocks away from the park. And the other part of the story was that she was kidnapped, tortured, and brought back to the park, I believe.
No.
That actually doesn't seem to be the case in what really happened. But
oh, well, that's good. I'm
it
glad
is.
to hear that.
It is good. It's good. But it seems that the story itself developed in that way because of the kind of cautionary tale that it presents.
And now people love a cautionary tale.
We sure do. And I have to say that I think a lot of what we consider ghost stories come from that.
Now, see, that makes sense. You remember when I was talking a couple years ago about how medieval ghost stories were all propagated by the church because they served church purposes?
Exactly. And it actually brings up something else that I remembered in that book as well. It actually was a ghost story from Tallahassee. And I think it was back during slavery, and the slaves would tell their children stories about this like creepy ghost guy who targeted children. Basically, it was a cautionary tale about staying out of the woods in order to avoid being captured and, you know, sold elsewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's an important thing to teach your children, and I honestly think slave owners are scary enough, but if you don't think that they're scary enough, then do your thing.
So anyway, the guy who debunked the story about the girl who was murdered under the bridge is the one who said information is killing ghost stories. And I think what he was trying to say there was that the more we know about the real story and the more details that we put into it based on what really happened, potentially the less scary it becomes. It's more like a disconnected story that's just kind of like, oh, this thing happened and here's like a list of stuff.
Or maybe that we put in the things that really appeal to our id, that we put in a bunch of stuff that appeals to our need for cautionary tales, and if you have to take that out, it reduces the power of the story. People are less likely to tell it.
So you mean the collective id? I understand. I thought you meant like the id of the storyteller themselves?
No.
Cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, the cultural zeitgeist. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Which is appealing to the people who listen to it on an id level. Something in their gut. It's resonating with them.
Yeah, I would assume so. So let's kind of switch over to talking about haunted houses just really quick. I wanted to briefly talk about haunted houses just because I think I'm kind of in that headspace where I'm thinking about spaces as being haunted and as being the origin for ghost stories.
The space rather than the ghost?
The space is haunted by people who have lived there before and sometimes the lack thereof. So this house is haunted by the history of a family tragedy.
Okay. I got you. That's like, that it's somewhere in the foundation, sort of become part of the house.
It can be. So
that is something Stephen King loves.
I like it too.
We were just talking about this. Like, we were just talking about how he keeps writing genus loci, places like Salem, where the town isn't exactly alive, but it kind of is, and it's kind of evil, and it's just this well of misery. He did the same thing with Derry and It.
That's totally true. And I guess that actually sort of feeds into the point that I was going to make about this as well, is that sometimes, like, if you look at a lot of ghost stories in general, they have to do with a town that has a certain way that things go. So, there's a terrible secret that's unearthed or sacred land that's disturbed. Something that is being messed with because of the ignorance of some sort of outsider. So you can kind of see that in a lot of haunted house stories where some rich person comes to a small town and buys a large piece of land and builds this big ugly house. And of course that goes into the unhomely, Unheimlich thing because it's not in keeping with the rest of the community, and basically the haunted house at the edge of town comes from this eccentric rich person who is not in tune with the community and causes some sort of problems for the community, and because of their socioeconomic limitations they can't leave. They're resentful because they're imprisoned by the rich. So
ghosts as a Marxist paradigm.
Something like that, yeah. But, you see that in a lot of things, like, I would say Shirley Jackson, and I think that it might even really come up in The Fall of the House of Usher, and...
I don't know that there's enough time in The Fall of the House of Usher to really talk about the impact it has on the people around it.
I guess that's true, but you still have to think of it in terms of, this is, a rich, isolated family that's, not connected to the community. So I guess you could look maybe in a background sense that it...
You could talk about maybe that it's conspicuous in its absence.
Yes.
The lack of community.
I think
which
that's
could have
true.
saved them, maybe.
So anyway, that was just kind of briefly what I wanted to talk about, but I think that is pretty much the end of my notes. So did you have anything you wanted to add?
I do think that this segment is very Stephen King, especially when you bring, when you want to talk about Kubrick's interpretation of The Shining, which,
Stephen King hated. I know he did, but it is a good film.
It plays on a lot of the stuff that Stephen King is usually talking about, this, idea of the ground being haunted from the soil up.
Exactly. So, I don't know. Because there's a lot in that movie that's all about, kind of pointing to Native American land and things like that, even though they're not overt. There's little, symbols and pictures in the backgrounds and things of that nature. But anyway, that is a discussion that could go on for hours.
Really.
It has, exactly. It is a very good movie, and honestly, I don't know. I think probably as a writer, it would just be hard to let go of the story that you're wanting to tell, and if you're not directly involved, and even sometimes when you are, you can become unsatisfied with an adaptation.
So, where we left off was...
I just basically wanted to make a note really quick that the reason that the audio quality is different now is because the last, 2 minutes of the podcast that we had recorded got some really weird interference.
Some really inexplicable interference.
Yeah, I have no idea where it came from, so
what I was saying was that if Stephen King doesn't like the movie version, which we all know he doesn't like the movie version of
The Shining,
then I can see why, because they kind of changed the whole tone of the movie. It's not really a scary movie as much anymore. There's some things that are scary in it, but it's mostly hallways for 3 hours.
It really is, but I think that builds up the horror and it builds up the anticipation a lot in a way that maybe isn't afforded in a book. So I think Kubrick really did a good job of...
With the visual aspect?
Yeah, really kind of translating
Because
it.
what the thing is they'll show you is that if you follow his little tricycle around the hotel, the outlay doesn't actually make any sense.
Yeah, it's actually not like a real loop, and somehow he gets to the second floor on his tricycle without going up any stairs.
Yeah, if you were to try to make a map, you'd be like, this is impossible. He couldn't have gotten from this set to that set.
And so the thing is, unconsciously, that makes us really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, you may not even actually realize that's what happened.
So if that's setting up the Unheimlich...
Exactly, and that's where we'll pick up on the second part of the episode. So this is part 1, and then we'll do part 2, and it's going to be a longer episode about ghosts in general, but specifically focusing on...
Perhaps hotels?
Hotels in general, and...
Unhomely spaces.
Unhomely spaces, exactly. So with that being said, we'll sign off, okay?
See you next time.
Bye! Alright guys, we're back again with a second part of the ghost episode because February is demon month and I think that would be a lot harder to do.
Did you do demons last year?
Demons, yeah.
Okay, well then it's already been done.
It has been done, but I don't know that I even did an episode, like a podcast episode on it.
Oh, well we'll save it for next year. It'll be fun.
Well,
We'll do some research.
maybe. We have I have a little bit to talk about it, but for the most part, this is just going to be a continuation of ghosts.
And harmful spirits.
Harmful spirits, and the unhomely, the uncomfortable, and sort of how that leads into hauntings.
Mm-hmm. So do you want me to talk about, very briefly, my
Hotel experience?
my expertise?
Well, let me preface it with...
Where do you want to start?
Basically, hotels have this thing where they try to make it seem like a home, so they have a lot of amenities that are meant to feel...
It's supposed to be comfortable and welcoming. It's supposed to feel like somewhere you can go to sleep, and they want it to feel like your bedroom, but it's not your bedroom.
It's not your bedroom, and it never will be your bedroom, and it's this sterile facsimile of...
Hopefully sterile.
Sterile in the sense of, like, decor?
Yeah.
Not necessarily...
Impersonal.
Yes, exactly. So it's not necessarily sterile in the clean sense.
You would hope it would be.
I mean, you know, there's always been debates about that and whether or not they actually really clean things and blah blah blah. Whatever.
I can tell you my experience what they clean and what they don't clean, which is they clean most of it.
I believe that. It just when you're at a lower end hotel, you know, like 1, 2
very different.
stars, you're basically going to get like basic cleaning. They're not gonna pull out the beds and vacuum behind all that.
They're not doing
stuff.
deep cleaning.
Not in any way.
Even in a pretty mid-range nice hotel, they're not like pulling things out of the walls to clean. There's no time.
Yeah, no, I mean,
you gotta flip those rooms within an hour.
It's hard. And honestly, guys, be nice
to your housekeepers.
To the housekeepers.
Be nice to your housekeepers. They don't get paid enough for what they do.
Tip them if you can.
The housekeeper is the lifeblood of the hotel.
Really, without them, the hotel does not run.
Yeah. Anyway, where did we want to start this?
So, I guess you could just tell us about your...
So, today's my last day. You're joining me on my last day of work at a nice mid-range hotel.
I think a 3-star, right?
Yeah, we're like a 3-star. It doesn't get any nicer in Tallahassee. I work front desk. So I'm not up in the rooms all the time, so it's not like I am a housekeeper. But the thing is that I keep hearing people mention that our hotel is haunted.
Are you serious?
Yes, and here's the funny thing, is that people who say our hotel is haunted is always something they've heard from someone else.
I have
never met the person who's witnessed it firsthand. And I talk to the night auditors. You can't come into your shift without talking to the night auditors. And I never hear anything. So there's just, I think, this idea that a hotel should be haunted, maybe.
Just because of the nature of
the expectation that a hotel will be haunted.
Here's the thing that always, creeps me out, even in, a regular hotel that I've never heard anything about, blah, blah, blah. Somehow there's never anybody in the hallways. You know there's people in their rooms. You know that there are people there. But you're just walking down these hallways that look exactly the same, with
That's interesting.
Weird carpets that are like
Yes.
kind of ugly.
It's always ugly carpets.
You know, with weird oranges and reds and stuff in them.
Yeah, they do that so you hide stains.
But it's just, you know, you're just kind of walking down the hallway looking at these things, and like all the doors are the same, and there's never anybody in the hallways.
You're right. It is a little bit creepy if you think about being in the presence of so many human beings that the expectation is that you will never interact with them, and you're all staying in the same building together. It is a little strange. It's not like if you live in an apartment complex and you have neighbors and you interact with them periodically. It's not like that at all.
Because, yeah, at a hotel you don't want to interact with
No.
people.
So the idea of a hotel that it's haunted because hotels should be haunted is very interesting to me. And there are certain people who, they tell us at the hotel, you cannot say the hotel is haunted. You're not allowed to admit that. Because you'd think that it would be good for business, and I think it's kind of a double-edged sword.
In some places, they do think that it's good for business, and that's actually interesting that you brought that up, because I remember in the book that I was reading, The Ghost Land, there's a whole chapter about hotels, and a lot of the non-personal information that I got for this episode is from that book and that chapter specifically. And he was talking about in LA, there's a lot of ghost hunters.
Oh, yeah.
And they are always trying to go to these haunted hotels and blah, 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 and they're trekking through, and they're not bringing money.
Oh, you can't just go into the hotel if you're not bringing money.
You know, yeah, you like, if you're gonna go, you have to...
Where's their security not kicking them out?
Well, no, the thing is that, like, they are invited, or they, at some point, were invited to come in. And
okay.
Because, you know, it's supposed to drum up business. It's supposed to be
it's like a publicity stunt.
This ghost hunting group came in and blah, 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 and it's haunted and whatever.
Okay.
But there's a lot of these very old Art Deco type hotels in downtown LA that were once very high end, and now basically they're only known for being haunted. And so, of course, they're kind of...
That's where the money comes from.
That's where they're trying to get the money to come from, but in this case it doesn't. In a lot of those cases it seems like it doesn't, and so there's definitely places that ghost hunters are no longer welcome. So
yeah. You tromp through one too many times.
And don't get a beer or whatever.
I mean, like, here's my thing, is that just buy a beer, you know?
I agree.
If you're gonna be over there overnight, rent a fucking room.
Yeah.
If you can afford ghost hunting equipment, you can afford a room in a low-end LA hotel for, like, one night.
Yeah, I would think so.
I mean, not to say LA's cheap, but come on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are downtown, which means they're kind of near Skid Row and things like that. I mean, obviously, do you know about the Cecil Hotel?
Sounds familiar. Tell me about it.
This is the one where there was a Canadian tourist who was staying there and she disappeared for a while.
Oh, is this the one where they found her body inside the water well?
Yes.
Oh, my favorite story. We talked about this last time.
Oh, I think we did. So, yeah, the Cecil is right there near Skid Row, and...
That's so disgusting. Can you imagine having drunk that water?
No.
Can you imagine, like, having that in your body?
It's pretty scary and upsetting. I can only imagine.
Now, that's a horror story.
It is.
Oh.
It really almost seems like something that could be made up.
It does sound made up.
But anyway, and then there's a couple other hotels that are downtown in LA, like the Bonaventure and some other ones that the Black Dahlia was supposedly staying at.
Why is she called the Black Dahlia? Because I know she's got a real person name.
She does. Her name is Elizabeth Short.
So in 1946, this movie called Blue Dahlia came out. It was a film noir that was originally a screenplay written by Raymond Chandler, who was a huge name in detective fiction and also the founder of hard-boiled novels like The Big Sleep, which I read, and was later turned into a movie with Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart. So The Blue Dahlia was basically a movie about these three guys who were former Navy aviators. That sounds so funny, Navy aviators, who settle in Hollywood, and they get up to all kinds of like shenanigans and stuff around Hollywood, including dealing with a cheating wife and, I don't know, going to this nightclub called the Blue Dahlia. So when the press finally found out who Elizabeth Short was, they started airing all of her dirty laundry to try to figure out who had killed her, because she had all of these different relationships with different guys and had been living in different places and had all these different friends around town. And, you know, she was like moving from place to place and trying to avoid paying rent and just kind of general scandalous behavior for the time. So one of the places that Elizabeth used to go to a lot was this lunch counter called Flanders. And apparently she was like always wearing black, which made an impression on some of the other regulars there. So when the press came to interview them about her, they sort of made the connection between her and the movie because of the similar themes, quote unquote, I guess, because, you know, it's like her real life. And the name stuck. So initially the press was calling the murderer, whoever did it, the werewolf killer because of the brutality of the murder. But when the guys gave Elizabeth the name the Black Dahlia, the rest is history.
You had something in your notes about the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, I do. I was definitely going to talk about her, but I was trying to find the names of the hotels. Biltmore.
Ah, the Biltmore.
Yeah, so the Biltmore is actually the one that she supposedly haunts.
Oh, okay.
And don't really know why exactly, but that is one of the hotels that she supposedly stayed at.
One of the places because she was always moving around.
She was moving around a lot because she wasn't making a whole lot of money. She's living in this expensive town trying to make it. Couch surfing, yeah. I mean, she was pretty down on her luck at this point. So there's a reason that somebody who has a story like that becomes the ghost that haunts a hotel like that. Mm-hmm. Because she's sort of emblematic of the trauma and the pain that existed, or I mean, not even existed, exists.
She becomes the lightning rod for that whole culture of misery, the couch surfing,
the trying to make it work and
day waiter,
never getting there. Exactly. Mm-hmm. People who spend their days off, you know, going to cafes,
audition after audition.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, but
well, we were talking about last time about ghost stories persisting because they speak to something that needs to be spoken to. The idea that they fill a cultural role, that they satisfy something in the id.
And let's think about LA in general. I think,
is there a bigger cultural touchstone?
Exactly, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, honestly, I know that a lot, you know, basically the two cities in the United States are New York and LA.
Yeah.
LA is much bigger than New York. It has a lot more urban sprawl.
Yeah. I mean, there's Hollywood and then there's LA. They're the same thing, but they're two different things, too.
They absolutely are. I mean, well, Hollywood exists within LA because...
But
it's actually called Hollywood because there was a neighborhood. And so the Hollywood sign was an advertisement for
the neighborhood.
A neighborhood that was called Hollywood Land. And it at one point had like flashing lights in the early 20s.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
It was like a housing development?
I guess so. I mean, really the only people that were out there in the early 20s at that time were people in the quote-unquote movie colony.
Movie colony?
Yeah, did you know it was called
the movie colony?
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, that's where all of the acting and stages and all that stuff was going on, but a lot of the business aspects were still taking place in New York.
Interesting. No, I didn't know any of this. Most of what I know about Hollywood comes from reading the Terry Pratchett spoof novel. So it's like all the same stuff, but with an eldritch abomination that's trying to, like, come into their reality.
That's amazing.
Through the silver screen.
What is it called?
Oh, it's called Moving Pictures, and they have, and it's all taking place in the sacred grove called Hollywood.
I like it.
It's good. You'd like it.
God bless you, Terry Pratchett.
You would get all the jokes that I did not get.
There was, I mean, I've read quite a few not stories. I've read a few books now about early Hollywood murders. Or unusual deaths. I actually just finished reading a story about Carol Lombard and how her death was, or the plane crash that took her life was sort of mysterious.
The thing is that everybody's on cocaine. If something's mysterious, it's probably because somebody was on cocaine somewhere involved in the process.
Could have been the...
planes taken off the wrong way, landing the wrong way, crashing, cocaine.
That's totally possible. What happened was the plane actually had to make an emergency not an emergency landing, but an unplanned landing in Las Vegas. They're basically flying across the country. And this was in the early days of flight, so things are still not totally ironed out.
What year are we talking?
42? 1942?
Okay, we're back in the 40s. Got it.
We're back in the 40s, yeah. We took a little detour to the 20s, and now we're back in the 40s. But Carol Lombard started in the, I think, late 20s, early 30s. So she was still interacting with some of the same people that really started the movie industry. You know, she was in the pictures that, I forgot what his name is. It's Mac something. But he made these like real short comedy things. And he was married to Mabel Normand, and she's a really big name in early Hollywood. And she had kind of a tragic death as well.
Cocaine.
I mean, she did have a drug problem.
Yeah.
She
comes with the territory.
She was very good friends with Desmond Taylor,
I think I actually know that name.
was mysteriously murdered
No, I don't know that name.
in 1921, and technically his murder is still unsolved. But it seems like some of the people who are in charge of the movie colony probably have a good idea of who done it.
And they kind of kept it hush-hush.
Yeah, because it was bad for business.
Bad for business.
Because they'd had a string of deaths and scandals and
Yeah,
things like
and
that.
this was back when they had just figured out that they wanted to try and sell movie stars as a brand. Like, their whole personality could be an item which could be sold.
Consumed.
Yeah, could be consumed by the masses, which I'll never forgive them for. I hate celebrity culture and everything it stands for.
Yeah, so she was good friends with William Desmond Taylor, and he paid for her to go to rehab for a while. I think she was on cocaine.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, yeah, exactly.
So, we're like in LA and we're talking about the hotel jumping Hollywood lifestyle.
But really, I mean, what you just said about celebrity culture is a big reason why we have these kinds of ghost stories.
Right.
We're concerned about these people.
Because they're big names that we recognize, and so when something goes on with them, it's something that we have access to.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, they're documented.
They're documented.
And that's a really big thing that actually comes from another book that I read by Bill James. He was talking about how the Black Dahlia murder has really captured our attention and is kind of the American Jack the Ripper, where we're constantly trying to figure out who did it, and it's like one of the most famous murders in American history.
I'd never heard of it before we started talking about it.
Are you serious?
I guess I don't know anything about LA or Hollywood or celebrities, and so
I just like mysteries. I mean, that's really what it comes down to for me, is I really love to think about unsolved stuff.
And a lot of our mysteries belong to the documented people of America who are living in LA and getting in the tabloids.
But see, the people who are also accused of the murder are people who have names.
Right. They're always trying to pin it on somebody who has a historical body.
Yeah, so there's somebody who we have the names of. It's not like, everybody was totally undocumented, but there's more people who were just average Joes who got up at 8 in the morning, took their kids to school, went to work, picked their kids up.
If she hadn't been murdered, she would be one of those people.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. A big part of the reason that she's so famous is because of this culture that she was emblematic of.
Yeah. I think that, in a way, that's the big difference between the Black Dahlia murder and Jack the Ripper, is that with Jack the Ripper, most of our suspects are, local citizens from that neighborhood.
Yeah, but they were people who, so-and-so the doctor, or so-and-so famous painter, or there's even actually a theory that one of the princes
Oh, yeah, boy.
did it. That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, or H.H. Holmes. It had to be him.
Right, he, left Chicago for a while and, came to...
Jesus.
Yeah, right. So, again...
But, okay, so you're right. But there's still a tendency to want to think of the mystery in terms of big names. But I do think that, at least within the realm of people who are, consider themselves serious Jack the Ripperologists, the core suspects are people who are actually fairly undocumented people.
Do you know that for sure?
Well, as I'm remembering it, I'm thinking, one of them is the last victim's boyfriend that she lived with, and
He was trying to scare her.
some local loser who's just moved in from the country, and a couple other people like that.
Yeah.
And you know what? I can't really say that those are the most popular suspects. I don't know.
So here's the thing about a lot of the suspects. I mean, at least some of them. There were some people who spent their lives in insane asylums and other things like that, so they are more documented than your average person, because then they're a patient and a number, and they have a story, and they're being observed.
To a degree.
Yes, to a degree, because they have a doctor and blah, blah, blah. And these are people who, for one reason or another, are being pointed to.
Yeah. I do know that one of the guys I was thinking of, I think, had a criminal record.
That makes you more documented than your average person.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, how can you accuse someone who
you don't know existed?
Effectively doesn't exist.
Right.
Especially in another time period. If you go back to the 40s even though that feels modern, it's really not modern.
No, I mean, that's actually, it's interesting because when I was reading that story about Carol Lombard and the planes and all this stuff, nowadays when a plane crashes, you know immediately.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, because there's computers that are tracking it and all these things. And in this case, they were like, hey, we haven't heard from such and such plane in a while. Can you fly around to see, you know, there's a fire up on this mountain. Can you see if maybe
if the fire is our plane?
Yeah. And so, I mean, it was basically they were just having to do all this guesswork, and not to mention that the mountain was very difficult to climb. So the first responders got there hours and hours after the plane crashed. Mm-hmm. And even then, they weren't really able to do anything.
What could they do with 1940s EMT? Mm.
They weren't even EMTs. They were just
dudes.
Like Nevada dudes who like were kind of rough and tumble, and they were like, hey, go check this out. See if there's some survivors.
Yeah.
That you couldn't help.
You're not going to be able to do much.
No. But, I mean, everybody in that crash died on impact, basically. So there weren't any survivors.
Except for the one person who wandered into the woods and became a cryptid.
I hope so. God, that'd be good. No, I think they were pretty much able to account for everybody. There was like 3 people that they weren't entirely able to find like most of their body. So what they wound up doing was just kind of putting all their parts together and cremating them and then separating them into 3 parts to give to their respective families.
Some of them got to be in there, so that's fine.
Some of them.
Some of them.
But for the most part, people were mostly identified.
Is that a story that has a haunting element to it?
Carol Lombard is supposed to be a ghost somewhere, but I don't remember.
Not on the mountain where she died.
Not on the mountain, because nobody goes to the mountain.
That's interesting. And we were talking about Black Dahlia. She doesn't haunt
that random patch of grass where her body was found.
Mm-mm.
And, you know, if she
doesn't haunt her childhood home.
We have no idea where she was murdered, but wouldn't it make sense that she would haunt the place she was murdered?
You would expect.
I mean, that's where a lot of people say that hauntings take place, but
it's the site of the violent death.
Yeah. So it would make sense for Carol Lombard and the other 20 some odd people that were... See, that's the other thing, too. The plane only carried like 20 people. 22 people, I think. That's a really small amount. It was an early plane, so it really just didn't have that many people on it.
Right.
Nowadays, planes carry hundreds of people.
Yeah.
Not hundreds, but like a little over 100, I think. So, I mean, that's a huge difference as well.
Yeah. I am interested in the idea of where your spirit haunts. If you read fantasy stories and speculative fiction, a lot of the time they'll talk about the idea of your soul being attached to a piece of you or a thing that you liked a lot. Supernatural.
Definitely.
TV show style.
Yeah, where you had to burn the heart or whatever that was still around.
It could be a flask.
You remember where it was like a glove that had like skin particles in it or something?
Yeah,
they were reaching a little bit.
That was so silly. They could have just said it was the glove. Like, okay, the glove was important to them. It's the glove. Like, you don't have to do the whole skin particles thing.
I know, that was silly.
But like, I've seen this in other types of media too. This idea of being attached to an item or an object. And I'm really not sure how common that is in reported ghost sightings. If that's something that mostly shows up in fiction.
I mean, there is some idea of like objects being haunted because of their importance or whatever their energy sucking qualities. Sorry, that's like a really stupid way to say that.
Sucking qualities.
You know what I'm saying, though, is like they basically, it was some sort of object.
When I think of those, I mostly think of fictional examples.
Yeah.
Like the Portrait of Dorian Gray and stuff like that.
I'm trying to, hold on.
I mean, if you go back to, like, say, that one Greek story that we love to talk about, where they found the body in the
the basement.
They found the body in the basement.
Well,
They found
not the basement.
The body buried in the yard with the chains on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the ghost was attached to its body. It was haunting its own body. So, that's something that shows up really early on. But
Yeah.
I think this idea of objects, I'm kind of drawing a blank.
Yeah, I thought there was something in here that was talking about, like, non-living.
That would be demons and stuff, right?
No, it was like horses and ships.
Oh, fuck yeah. Horses and ships?
Yeah, there was...
Ghost of a ship?
But it's the Flying Dutchman.
Flying Dutchman. I forgot about that.
Here. Bayard, the Phantom Horse. Phantom horses are rarely encountered without riders. One of the most famous is Bayard, the Wander Horse of
The
Renault.
Wonder Horse.
Of Renault, who was one of the 4 renowned sons of Aymon and a paladin of Emperor Charlemagne in the 8th century. Renault was eventually declared an outlaw and was besieged in the castle of Montauban, France, for 7 years. When he finally made peace, he was sent on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and Bayard was thrown into the river with a millstone around his neck.
That is just...
That's a shitty way to kill
What a
something.
waste of a horse.
I know, I agree. But the horse escaped, and his ghost can still be seen in the Ardennes. I don't know French, so I'm sure I said that wrong.
Where is it? In the...
Ardennes?
Ardennes?
I don't
Perhaps?
know. I don't trust you and your French,
What,
Francois.
yeah, what do I know about French? Fuckade.
Where houses have been built over his old haunts, Bayard may even appear at night to terrify some unsuspecting sleeper. And that story came from the book Ghost Sightings, The World's Spookiest Cases by Brian Innes.
I did listen to the last podcast and the last episode about ghost cats.
Ghost cats.
Ghost cats.
Aw.
There are not many.
No. There is a book series that I think is like about different animals. There's one about cats and there's one about dogs, but it's kind of sad stories.
Yeah.
Just like personal
I mean, they're all dead.
accounts. I know, but it's like personal accounts of like, I had this cat and then the cat died. And
I knew somebody who said that this spectral pack of kittens would come down the stairs periodically, and they would disappear when they got to the bottom.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Cecilia told me that she had one of her cats was euthanized in their house when he got older, like a lot older. He was blind and incontinent and suffering, and so they actually had a vet who came and put him to sleep in their house. And she said for about a month after that, she would feel a cat jump up on her bed and kind of
That's wild.
put a little bit of weight on her legs, because that's where he used to sleep.
Well, that's wild. Cecilia is not really someone to make things up.
No, she's not. I mean, she's not like, oh yeah, I definitely saw a ghost and like always like bullshitting. Like I definitely believe her.
Actually, that is very
Credible?
credible and very upsetting to me.
I'm sorry. But yeah, so yes, they're animals I think are more likely than
I'm not
haunted
sure how
objects.
else to explain that. She could have been dreaming, I guess.
Or it could have just been maybe because she was used to that happening, she just sort of,
It was sort of filling itself in.
I don't know. But I mean, she said it only happened for about a month and then it stopped.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Gotta move on.
He moved on. It's good.
I think I like the idea of ghosts having a mourning period
Aww.
where they hang around for a little while.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of depends on who you ask. In some traditions, it's the ghost. That's the one that's like really bereaved and upset and like this awful
And you've got to
thing.
make the ghost feel better.
Or like just avoid it.
Or just avoid
Like
it
pretend
entirely.
like you're not seeing it so it'll like go away. Mm-hmm. I actually listened to a podcast recently that was talking about that, and I think it was a tribe in the Amazons that had that particular belief. So it is interesting. Because I could totally see that being the case where you're like, well, fuck, I'm dead. This is fucked up. I don't want to be dead.
I think it's really interesting how different cultures interact so differently with the dead. Because in some places it's like, you know, the dead are your friends, the dead are your loved ones. They still kind of have personalities. And then there's other cultures where as soon as someone dies, it's like a switch flips and they're no longer your friends or allies.
And I mean, I wonder if that has something to do with like your own self-preservation.
I wonder if it has something to do with maybe not having a good family. Because
It's like, oh yeah, I totally loved them, but I'd really love them to fuck off now.
yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering if maybe some of that has to do with trying to avoid dead bodies in general.
I mean,
like not being too sentimental about them
think so.
because you think that they'll bring you disease.
You gotta think so, because I mean, there's that whole swath of Africa where they have the funeral rite that involves laying hands and kissing the dead, and they had a really, really bad time with Ebola.
Yeah, I remember
Because you
that.
can get that straight from the skin. And so you touch them, and then you've got Ebola.
I mean, if you waited long enough, you would be okay for the most part.
Yeah, but
I think it's like a couple of days.
But you can't wait that long because the body's rotting.
Right.
You got to get it in the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some religions. I think it might be Islam where like somebody has to be buried within 24 hours of their death.
Well, I think that they have a large Islamic population in that region, so
it's totally possible.
I wouldn't be surprised if those two things were related. But also, I was thinking it's just hot.
It is hot, and they're rotting. But actually, I think people have an inflated sense of how sick you can get from a dead body, because really pathogen in a few days at the most. Like, some of them die even sooner than that. So, but dead bodies are actually a lot more, and I won't say clean, but they're more hygienic than
they're less dangerous.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to point that out, and I would say that probably the reason why we are so programmed, we're so hell-bent on getting dead bodies away from us, maybe isn't exactly because of the pathogens that we're likely to pick up from touching them. It's more to do with scavengers that come around and things like that, and if you just leave a body there, it starts to rot, and that gathers all sorts of other problems.
Wolves and things, and you were talking about that in a previous episode.
With the wolves digging up the bodies during the plague times. Yeah, and people going, oh, well, the werewolf must be fighting the vampire.
Actually, I just finished reading a book. I read a lot of books. I just finished reading a book called...
How do you have time for this?
I don't know. I just do. I don't know. It's Stiff by Mary Roach. She's written a lot of books that take really interesting scientific approaches to common things, including the digestive tract and sex and ghosts and all that sort of stuff. But the Stiff is about human cadavers, and there was a part where she was talking about the funerary process in the United States in the Victorian times, and why they were like, oh, we need to like seal them up as best as possible because they thought that these pathogens would seep into the water, and there would just be this disgusting miasma of like dead body nastiness underneath graveyards.
I understand that fear,
but it's totally unfounded. I mean, dead bodies have been rotting for
dead bodies
millennia.
have been rotting underground for the entire existence of life, and we have not yet died of it.
Right, exactly.
Well, that woman who died in the water reservoir on top of the hotel.
Totally different story. Should not have been there. That is a completely unnatural, man-made situation.
Yeah, I don't think anybody died from it.
No, people got kind of grossed out.
Yeah, they got super grossed out, but they didn't die from it, which
they did not.
What I would assume when I hear that is if you drink body juice, you die.
People have been consuming dead bodies for a long time.
Like squishy, rotten, swamp dead bodies?
Well, I'm just saying, like, in the book Stiff, there's a whole chapter about...
Cannibalism?
No, not cannibalism. Early practices where people thought that certain body parts had medicinal qualities.
So cannibalism.
Medical cannibalism.
So this is the thing where they ground up mummies and they gave it to you for every single illness.
That was included in there. There was also a thing where a body had to like sit in honey for 100 years or something gross like that. And there was other nasty things, including like toenails and spit and disgusting things. I think the origin of this whole conversation comes back to where the haunting is.
Where the haunting is.
Yeah, because there are also some hotels or sort of housing areas that were sort of hotels that famous people lived at, where the ghost of Montgomery Clift is angrily playing the trombone, or like Marilyn Monroe is wandering around, you know.
Catch me in the afterlife angrily playing the oboe.
You know what? It's totally possible. Especially since you never played the oboe in life.
It would be more accurate to find me playing the tuba.
The tuba. But those are not necessarily the places that these people died either.
Yes.
So why is this where they choose?
And yet in house hauntings, it's almost always that they died in the house.
Yeah, and I mean, why else are people so freaked out about, like, oh, the old woman who lived here before we did died here?
I did just watch The Conjuring.
Oh yeah, the first one or
the first
second
one?
Okay.
And like they open The Conjuring with this like group of young college students or whatever who are all scared of the doll that they invited a ghost to come live in.
Oh, the Annabelle? That was setting up the Annabelle.
Yeah, I did not know what was going on in that movie.
Well, basically the whole Conjuring series is setting up different cases that the Warrens did.
Oh, is that what that's about?
Yeah.
I noticed at the end they were alluding to Amityville.
They were, and then, in the second one, they briefly had some stuff about Amityville, but, then they completely moved on and then jumped into the infield.
Man, fuck off.
No, but I actually really liked the second one a lot. I think it was better than the first one.
Okay, well, I'm gonna watch it eventually. They invited a ghost into the doll, and then the hunters or whatever their names are. They were
Ed and Lorraine were.
They're like, oh, that ghost was never alive. That's a demon. You really should not have interacted with it at all. So, I guess that's the fear, is that you're too nice to a ghost and it turns out not to really be a ghost.
I think that's maybe a little misleading. I think people have that kind of assumption that if you're inviting anything in, you're automatically inviting
everything.
Right.
I do. I felt like when I watched it in the movie, I felt like it was a fiction twist that they were really patting themselves on the back for bringing into the story. They were like, ooh, don't be nice to the ghosts. Ghosts are evil. Ha ha.
So that's actually interesting. It makes me want to discuss this quick passage here in the introduction to Ghost Sightings, the World's Spookiest Cases. And it's basically what this says is ancient people really believed that spirits stayed at either the place of their death or their burial. And then it sort of talks about Plato and his thing that he wrote in this Phaedo.
Fido, I think.
Okay, so Fido. He writes, quote, the stories about souls that roam about tombs and burial grounds.
Okay, but the point is that he's talking about a tradition of tropes that are very much burial ground, tomb centric.
Yeah, they stay in this place of the dead specifically. But he also apparently believed that ghosts were bad spirits.
Plato had some opinions.
He sure did, and he was a bitch. But anyway, he goes on to say, it is clearly not the souls of the good, but those of the wicked that are compelled to wander about such places as the penalty for a bad way of life in the past.
That's interesting. We talked a year or so ago about graveyards, and we talked about...
We sure did. There's a graveyard month, and there's some stuff I want to talk about then when we get to it, but I'll mostly save what I was going to say, so continue.
Well, we talked about Greek graveyards, ancient Greek graveyards, and we talked about how as time went on, the graveyard moved further and further away from the city, and ghosts became more and more malevolent. And
what are they doing out there?
Have you ever seen a ghost? Yeah, I didn't think so. They're up to no good. So Plato was writing in the classic period, which would have been very much in the distant graveyard evil ghost period. Yeah. So I think he's mostly speaking to the zeitgeist of his time.
Yeah, I would say so. But it's actually interesting because then this book goes on to talk about how Christianity specifically misinterpreted this Greek word that is daemonian.
Yeah.
Which actually meant inner voice. So that's why in that book, the Golden Compass, they have daemons that are like the little animals or whatever.
Yeah, like your spirit familiar.
Yeah, exactly, a spirit familiar. So that's why that exists. But
yeah, I guess they saw that word and they thought, oh, demons.
They basically started describing this term as a servant of evil. So they sort of saw all ghostly manifestations as evil spirits that were doing the bidding of Satan, which that sounds about right.
I mean, there was definitely a push to say, well, our God is the only God, and so that means that anything else that has power, if it's not coming from our God,
it gotta be evil.
It's evil. A equals B equals AB, whatever. And there's that whole push in Russian folklore to take what had been nature spirits that were sort of ambiguously good or evil and
describe them either evil or good.
Yeah, talk about them as being fallen angels who fell as far as earth but didn't fall all the way to hell.
Basically what it's saying is that to some people, ghosts were all bad or malevolent.
What have we forgotten? All hotels are haunted.
That's what it says. You don't recognize it, but we all sleep with ghosts when we're sleeping at a hotel.
I love that. I don't know if it's literally true, but...
I mean, ghost in the sense of, this building that has accumulated human energy. I mean,
Like we were talking about last time, the idea of these places that have a sort of mind of their own.
yeah, a little bit, because I mean, people have just been there. I think also there are a few different types of ghosts or ghostly energies. So, there's poltergeist.
We talked about.
There's intelligent hauntings. So where there's like an actual entity that's like there and experiencing things and trying to communicate. But then there's residual hauntings. And I think that hotels really lend themselves to residual haunts, because it's not necessarily, that there's actual individual people that are there.
Yeah, when you talk about hotel hauntings, a lot of time when it's not the Black Dahlia and stuff like that, you're getting like lights flickering, noises in the hallways, stuff like that.
Yeah, like the clumping of shoes or whatever.
Just sort of impersonal.
Could be anybody.
And, here's the thing. We always want to think about those in terms of guests who have stayed at the hotel, but guests come and go. The people who are really, their blood and sweat is in that building are, the housekeepers who are pushing their little carts, and the maintenance people who are up till 4 o'clock in the morning trying to fix the fucking wire. Those are the people who, I feel bad for them, but they're probably going to get stuck there in some...
Yeah. I mean, the same with, like, theaters. When theaters are haunted, it's always by the projectionist. It's never a guest or some moviegoer.
Because when we look at the theaters, we know people come and go. But I think it's because the people who work in hotels are supposed to stay behind the scenes.
I mean, that's why, like I said earlier, like, you don't see people in the hallways. It's just you.
It's just you. It's the illusion of being just you.
Yes, exactly.
And so, like, when we think about hotels, we really just think about ourselves. We think about ourselves as being the center that this hotel revolves around, but we're only there for a couple days.
If that. I mean, some people are just there to sleep.
And the hotel continues to exist long after you leave it.
And existed long before you were there. Anyway, I think that's pretty good. You want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we covered all of our stuff.
Yeah. Anything else that you wanted to say?
Glad to not be working in the hospitality industry anymore.
Woo!
Woohoo!
All right. Well, I guess we'll sign off then.
But then all hotels are haunted. You're kidding yourself if you don't see this, if you don't recognize that you are sleeping with ghosts.
Okay.
This is Savannah signing off.
Signing off. Bye!